Now, we here at WILK have been following the Ellen Greenberg case out of Philadelphia, knowing that Shapiro had agreed that 20 stab wounds to a woman's body could really be suicide, which kind of boggles a lot of our minds, especially with a woman and her strength and through where some of the wounds were found. Latest headline came out last week. A PA court ruled against the family in the Ellen Greenberg case. They find that the Philly investigation was deeply flawed. And today we are blessed enough to have this is really hard for them too, I'm sure. Sandy Greenberg, mother of Ellen, as well as Josh Greenberg, father of Ellen, on the phone. I think I'm learning how to use my phone, and I accidentally hung up on Sandy. Then we have Larry Sparano, who is local and has been following this case quite closely as well. And we have Joe Pedraza. You are the attorney on the case, Joe, and welcome you all to the show. Thank you for being here.
What about me?
Joe?
I'm the father.
I said Josh Greenberg. I did say that. You must have missed it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. As I was picking up the phone, I apologize, and I hung up on your wife by accident.
She's in the car. She's coming back. She'll get back.
Yeah, I see that she is calling back, so that is all good. And I know this is really hard on you, Josh, and I thank you for checking in. It seems like there are so many levels of wrong going on with this case and have been going on, and I guess maybe we should have the attorney, Joe Pedraza, to address that. Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm very good, Nikki, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be on your show and speak with your listeners.
Well, I thank you for sharing this story with us, because it seems to me that this is very difficult. Now, how could I read a headline that goes, PA court rules against family in Ellen Greenberg case, but also in the same breath says finds Philly investigation deeply flawed? How is that possible?
Well, that's a big surprise to us too, Nikki. And just for your listeners' benefit, there were two judges that ruled against us on a very narrow issue. Three judges all found that the investigation was flawed by the various departments in Philadelphia, and three believed that Ellen was murdered.
So all three did believe that there was a murder that happened.
Well, that's what the sense from what they wrote in their opinion is, that this was a murder. And in fact, the city itself, in one of the filings with the court, acknowledged that the evidence could be put together to strongly prove a murder. So there was concession almost across the board, even with the parties.
Right.
And for some reason, two judges felt that Sandy and Josh just did not have the right to speak for their daughter to remedy this wrong.
Right. And Sandy and Josh, though, I know that you're trying to remedy a wrong, but what do you expect to get from this? From are you going to continue? Are you going to go forward?
Yeah. Are you talking? Okay. You want me to answer that?
Yeah, Josh, you can answer.
Okay. I'm Josh Greenberg. I'm Ellen's. I am. I don't know.
You are. You still are, and you always will be.
Right. We want the truth. It's not a hard concept. What really happened to our daughter? And as I said yesterday to a local CBS station, if the truth is that this is the truth, which we don't believe, then I have to live with it. But I want the truth. We've asked for three things. Number one, change it to undecided or homicide, because that would open up an investigation. We'd like an unbiased investigation by an impartial source led by an unbiased person. That's it. This is not very complicated. We are not pointing fingers at anybody. In fact, the judges seem to point more fingers than we have ever done in 12 years, in my opinion. Joe can answer that question better than I can, of course. But we haven't pointed fingers like this. We've never said that this one was bad, that one was bad. But we are now, for the first time, sort of saying that in a civil suit, which Joe will discuss probably. But we want simple things. We want the truth about what happened to our daughter. And we've spent 12 years and quite a bit of money investigating it, and this makes no sense. And these judges just corroborate what we said.
After 12 years, you would think that the person responsible would actually not be able to sleep with themselves at night. It would be very hard. It would be very hard, and that they would start to speak themselves. You would think.
You're bringing up a question that I am not qualified to answer, which is about psychology and psychiatry.
True.
But if you tell yourself a lie enough times, and you tell enough people who want to believe the lie, I think they will believe the lie. But don't.
Nikki,
I'm not a
Nikki,
psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm sorry.
I understand. Yeah. Larry, Larry Sparano on the phone with us as well. Hello, Larry.
Yeah, Nikki, just for the listeners that may not be that familiar with the case, Ellen Greenberg was a Philadelphia area school teacher, 27 years old at the time, found stabbed to death with 20 stab wounds in her chest, her frontal area, in the back, her spine, her head, 20 stab wounds in her apartment that she shared with her fiancé. Now, before I get into more details, or any of us do, I want to emphasize that, a lot of people are not familiar with this case, although it has had national publicity. It's been on Fox. Nancy Grace has done something on it. It's been on Dateline, et cetera, et cetera. But
Larry, it's an international following.
And an international following. But, the essence of this case is that this didn't just happen to Greenbergs. The way this case was modeled up, the way the authorities turned their backs for 12 years now. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along, get lost, parents. Even though your daughter had 20 stab wounds with evidence, compelling evidence pointing to anything but a suicide, they ignored it. They told them to get lost. This could happen to any of us. Seeking justice was something that happens to one of our loved ones. That is the essence of this case. Because as much as the heartbreak of the Greenbergs are experiencing, it could affect any of us. It goes far beyond Philadelphia and the Greenbergs. It affects all of us.
And we don't know who it also may have already affected in the past or current that aren't opening their mouths and aren't saying, hey, something here doesn't smell right.
Yeah, well, the court ruling, and Attorney Pedraza could examine this further. I guess the central issue was whether they had standing. In other words, whether her parents, had an interest in overturning the medical examiner's case. Did they have standing? The court said no. Now, I don't know how much more of an interest you could have in a case when your daughter has been stabbed to death 20 times. So, Attorney Pedraza, can you explain more about that to us, about standing?
Well, Larry, you just did a great job of doing it. All standing simply says is that you have a personal interest in the case more so than just a general person in society or in the community. So something is personal to you. Agreed with you, Larry. I don't know what is more personal than wanting to know what happened to your daughter and having the correct manner of death determined for your daughter. Also, that you have a right to bring a civil lawsuit once a real investigation is done on behalf of your daughter. Those are all personal to Ellen Greenberg's estate and her parents. So, frankly, we just don't quite grasp why the two judges on the Commonwealth Court felt the way they did. But we do agree with the one judge who disagreed with them and said, hey, this case should go forward and this family should be allowed to finally get to trial, put the evidence on, and let a judge decide whether the actions by the medical examiner's office are arbitrary and capricious and whether they should be overturned.
Now, do you have any clue? I mean, you're the lawyer. Do you know why they would not see it, that they have an interest? Like, what is their excuse for saying the parents have no vested interest in this?
Let me say this to you, Nikki. I've been practicing now for over 35 years, and I have never been in a case where there has been more headwinds and more obstacles thrown into it and in front of the path of getting to a just result than this case. I can't explain why these two judges felt the way they did, but I don't think it will be upheld once we get to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The analysis just doesn't hold water, and it just doesn't make sense. It just simply doesn't make sense to sit there and say that Josh and Sandy have no special interest in the situation involving their daughter, whether this was murder or what it was. Makes no sense. And when it doesn't make sense, then you kind of have to scratch your head and say, well, what is going on here? And why, for God's sakes, has this been going on for 14 years? And can't the authorities just simply say, yeah, let's look at this again and let's do a thorough look at it?
So,
what is so hard about that?
So the next step is going forward to take it before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
In this particular part of the case, yes. But as Josh was saying, we also have a second lawsuit. This one brought on Josh and Sandy's individual behalf as well as the estate. And it is saying that there was a conspiracy to conceal this homicide. And that conspiracy is based on the evidence that we were able to get from this first case when we took depositions of the medical examiner office's personnel, the pathologists, etc. Just so your listeners understand, when we depose, when we ask questions of the pathologists involved in this case, one of the city's pathologists actually came out and said there's a wound, two stab wounds, which have no hemorrhage, meaning they don't bleed. Well, think about this. If you took a pin and pricked your finger, what happens? You bleed. You bleed because you have blood running through your system. Your heart's pumping. If you were or somebody were to stick that same pin in a finger and no blood, well, that usually means that you're not living. Your heart's not pumping and you're dead. And that's what this pathologist in Philadelphia believed was the case, and they call it a post-mortem wound. Well, Nikki, maybe you can tell me, how does somebody who's already dead stab themselves then twice more?
I don't understand how somebody stabs themselves in the back or how...
I'd like to qualify something here, if I may, please.
Go ahead.
That person was not hired by Sandy and I. That person was an employee of the medical examiner's office who did not file a report for 2 years after examining the tissue.
Wow.
Yeah, Nikki, just a review of how absurd this all is. I mean, there's other evidence just as compelling, pointing to anything but a suicide. And, who turned their backs on this? Well, let's go up and down the line. It started out with the medical examiner's office in the city of Philadelphia, that they found nothing. First of all, interestingly enough, the medical examiner did first find it as a homicide. Then, after he was talked to by authorities, he was, quote, persuaded to change it to a suicide.
All right, we're going to hold it right there, Larry, and you can continue that right after we go to this break.
Okay.
We'll be right back with more on the update from the Greenberg case on WILK AM 103.1 FM and on your Odyssey app, WILK. newsradio.com. We are talking about the Ellen Greenberg case out of Philadelphia, but it does affect everyone. Larry Sparano is filling us in on how this kind of can affect everyone, number one, but the trail of what went wrong. So Larry, you were at the medical examiner's office.
Yeah, and Attorney Pedraza could correct me on anything that's inaccurate here, but the medical examiner first declared it a homicide. Then he was persuaded to change that opinion by non-medical people, by officials, detectives, etc., who persuaded him to change it to suicide, and that effectively kept the case from being properly investigated. Now, up and down the line, from the medical examiner's office, it was reviewed by the district attorney's office in Philadelphia, and they came to the same conclusion. Then it was kicked up to a Mr. Josh Shapiro, who was then the attorney general, who ran on a platform for governor of a truth finder and a crime fighter, et cetera, et cetera. He came down hard on people with the school system in Scranton and made a big case out of that. They promoted that a lot, but he saw nothing wrong with this case. He reviewed it, And by the way, in his office reviewing it were the same people that came to the same conclusion of suicide in the district attorney's office. So the same people that concluded that also concluded when it went to Shapiro's office, and there it has sat ever since. So the reason why I'm enumerating this is to make people realize how the system really works, how they could keep a case bottled up, how they could ignore compelling evidence for whatever reasons when they want to, and how they throw up roadblock after roadblock for somebody just asking for a complete, competent, professional investigation, which has never been done to this day.
And does anybody have any idea of why that wouldn't have been done properly in this case? We might have discussed this before.
Well, we could speculate, but we have to be careful here.
Right.
Motivations.
So it could have been a break-in gone bad, right?
Well, I mean, there's theories that it was merely sloppy work, and then they were too embarrassed to admit how sloppy and incompetent they were, so they covered it up for that reason. But there's other more nefarious theories as well, which we won't get into at this point. But the overall picture here is anybody who looks at this case, including these justices who just denied standing to the Greenberg, they concluded it was a screwed up investigation. Yet, and all they said was, hopefully they'll get justice someday. That was all they could offer the Greenbergs. I mean, this is how the justice system can be turned against anybody in this state. That's what's important about this case.
Right. And Attorney Pedraza, can you tell us how can we be confident in a system now that we look at that things are going to go properly? How can you use this case to help others in a certain, have you not as a lawyer lost confidence in the system as it works?
Well, let me take that last point. The answer is yes. This case has certainly made me very untrustworthy of government across the board. No question about it. And as Larry's pointed out, it's the fight of Sandy and Josh to date and the refusal to back down and to see this to the end. It is beneficial for all citizens in Pennsylvania because eventually, Nikki, we believe that the sun is going to shine and the Greenbergs will prevail. It's just a matter that we're just going to have to fight it to the end to do so. And it's just despicable, the thought that these parents have had to go through this amount of effort over this many years just to try to get some answers to what happened to their daughter, and they still don't have those answers.
Now, are you receiving any pushback from the powers that be to stop pursuing this case?
Well, when you get obstacles like this and the headwinds that we've faced, unprecedented in anything else that I've handled that have been just as much high profile as this case, I have to say, yeah, there is something in the background that does not want this case to go forward, and virtually every effort has been made to have this case go away. Now, how and who and what they're doing, I don't have answers to that because I don't have access to it. But we will pursue that line of questioning in the second lawsuit that we have pending because Josh and Sandy have directed me to get to the bottom of this. They're not going to just give up. And that's an important, I think, a very important point to be made. They won't give up. And from this, hopefully, positive investigative work, positive, responsible investigative work, and responsible public officials to the people can be accomplished as a result of, at the end, when we finally get to the end of this case.
Now, somebody asked, and this isn't just, somebody said, what took you 12 years to get to this point? But it hasn't been 12 years. You have been doing it. So why did it take 12 years to get this back to the courts, they asked?
Well, I think you have to take into account that the Greenbergs had nobody helping them from the authority standpoint. They just simply shut everything down, gave the Greenbergs no access to any of what their investigation had discovered or uncovered. So the Greenbergs had to create this out of whole cloth by themselves by going out and actually buying or paying for experts to get involved and to look at this. And experts then, with the minimal information that was made available, had to fill in gaps to guide the Greenbergs. That takes a lot of time, effort, and money. And that took at least 12 years out of the 14 to get to the point where you could finally go into a court and say, this is a murder, this is not a suicide. You know, you need to have a basis to make that claim. You have to have some sort of concrete support. And so it took the time to get that concrete support. And once it was sufficient, then the Greenbergs went forward, and that's where we are today.
Okay, so what else? So what is it? I'm sorry. I'm trying, Larry.
Yeah.
Larry. So where do we go from here?
Well, as Attorney Pedraza said, the next step is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which could take, by the way, several years just for them to decide whether they're going to take it up. If they turn it down, then possibly the U.S. Supreme Court. But, you know, the clock is ticking. The Greenbergs are getting on, as we all are.
I was just going to ask.
In age, and they're also expending tremendous amounts of their money personally in an attempt to pursue the justice that's been denied to them for the past 12 years. So where this goes, I mean, I hope Joe is right, that finally truth and justice will prevail. But what I've learned in this case, Nikki, and, you know, I already knew this from my days of reporting in Scranton on the system here when I was on WYOU and other cases statewide. What I learned is the system isn't what they portray it to be, you know, truth and justice, truth wherever it may lead. No, truth where we want it to lead if there's a certain interest involved in why we want the case to turn out a certain way. You know, it's an eye-opener for those who've never experienced that or looked into this to go into the Greenberg case and see absurdity after absurdity that was ignored, calling it a suicide when everything mitigated against at least reopening the case and finding out what really happened. I mean, 2 stab wounds that were inflicted after she died, a stab wound in the head, in the back. You know, the police would not release any of the reports. We don't know about any of the questioning of possible people that could possibly have been related in this. Everything has been clammed up from the medical examiner's office all the way up to the Attorney General, who was our current governor. He was the Attorney General at the time, and he looked the other way too. And this isn't a political thing. I've been accused of, you know, why am I picking on Shapiro? I'm picking on Shapiro. What I'm doing is pointing out, not picking on him. I'm pointing out he didn't do his due diligence on this case. And the question is why? And the Greenbergs are still waiting for justice. How long is it going to take?
And Sandy, how old are you? May I ask?
67.
67. And your health, how's your health?
Pretty good.
Even considering the stress and everything, or does this...
Well, I work really hard at trying to take care of myself, eat properly, exercise, because I want to be around to see this through.
Right. I completely understand.
It is very stressful. It's very, very stressful.
And Josh, how old are you?
I'm 74.
74. And your health?
So this started when I was 60 years old.
Wow. So in a fight where you think that your, you know, daughter is, you know, up and coming in this world, she's a teacher, things are going good, and all of a sudden you get a call that you've never wanted to get, and then it begins a fight that you never saw yourselves in.
Correct.
When you should be looking at retirement and enjoying life right now.
You know, we should probably ask the Greenbergs something about what their daughter was like and what she was looking forward to.
Yeah, so exactly. Did you talk, you mean around that time, were you talking to your daughter? Did she have hopes and plans for the future?
I talked
were
to
you
Ellen practically every day. She was looking forward to getting married, starting a family, traveling on family vacations. She loved life. She loved her friends. She loved her family. And
Look at what she was
had
doing.
a whole...
Look what was in the kitchen the day she was murdered. She was making a fruit salad from lunch, from scratch.
No.
She wasn't buying fruit salad. She was making it. I mean, to me, that epitomizes what kind of a mother and homemaker and person Ellen had become and was going to be when she was married and had children. I mean, it sounds silly probably to some people, just because this is a fruit salad, but it's not.
No,
She was going the extra mile to make it better.
right. And it doesn't sound like somebody who would be trying to stab themselves 20 odd times.
Well, Sandy Greenberg had just talked to her. Mrs. Greenberg had just talked to her daughter a few hours before, and everything was fine. She wasn't any signs of despondency, any suicidal thoughts. I mean, the whole thing, again, I keep using the term absurd. When you look into the case, how the officials could have ignored all of these elements and thought, nothing suspicious here, folks, move along.
So now
This was a day that Philadelphia was subjected to a nor'easter, and Ellen had left school and her children had gone home. When she got home, she called all of the parents to make sure the children got home okay.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, we got so
filled
many
her
things
car
from
up
the
on the
parents.
way home with a full tank of gas.
Wow. I have to go to break again. Hold on one second. We'll be right back. Joined on the phone by attorney Pedraza for the Greenberg family, Josh Greenberg and Sandy Greenberg, the parents of Ellen Greenberg, who had stab wounds, 20 plus stab wounds in Philadelphia, and it has been deemed a suicide. The family's still fighting to find out the truth. Also, Larry Sparano, who has been covering this case and following the case on his podcast. I have just about a minute left, and then I have to wrap up my show. But what can you just want the people to know and be aware that this is going on in their own state, and we have to be careful because it could happen to others as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take a few seconds to wrap it up. Again, the larger point here is what happened to the Greenbergs could happen to any of us unless we hold the feet to the fire of the officials who claim to follow truth wherever it may lead. That is not always the case. And the more people are aware of that, maybe something will change.
And accountable would look like people losing jobs and speaking the truth, right, Attorney Pedraza?
Would agree with that, Nikki, and amen to what Larry just said in summary.
All right, I have to go to the Bloomberg Money Minute, but thank you for checking in, and we will follow this with you.
Thank you, Nikki.
And God bless you, Josh and Sandy.
Thank you.
And we'll be back after the Bloomberg on WILK. Yeah, there are so many questions that come up with that Greenberg case. I know. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. Somebody asked, why aren't the feds looking into that? That would have been a good question. I just didn't, we're almost done with the show and we're moving forward. I'm going to have them back on again. We'll follow this case because I think it's very important, especially since it happened in our backyard. I will have to find out why the feds are not looking into that, but maybe we're not at that point yet. Maybe, I don't know. That is not my field of expertise. That's why I let the attorneys talk, and I would think the attorney knows which way to go with that. Now they did have Shapiro while he was Attorney General. He said, "Oh no, it's a suicide," but there's some issues there where what was said by the medical examiner's office would lead you to believe that it doesn't really look like a suicide here. But again, I don't have a medical degree, so if they think that there's more to go with, And if somebody could show them with this evidence that, okay, it was a suicide, but there's not a lot of evidence that would show that it was actually a suicide. It's just sort of one of those cases that they're hoping will just go away. And I believe that Ellen was an only child. So these parents at that age, you know, they need this closure, because who is going to follow up after them? Who will? So it's a very interesting story to follow, and it's tear-jerking and mind-blowing, to say the very least.